And just when analysts thought they understood the technology, Africa revealed something even more surprising, something that changed the entire global conversation. The wireless network wasn't just transmitting energy across short, local distances anymore. It had reached a milestone once considered impossible: long-range energy beaming between regions, with energy loss far lower than what traditional power lines suffer every single day. That meant one thing: Africa wasn't just electrifying villages anymore. It was building the foundation of a continental energy cloud. In one demonstration, engineers powered an irrigation facility 82 kilometers away from the nearest transmitter. The pumps activated instantly. The pressure stabilized perfectly, and the system kept running for hours, without a single fluctuation. Observers from the U.S. Energy Department were stunned. They quietly exchanged looks, whispered notes, and filmed every detail they were allowed to record. China's delegation asked if the patents were open to strategic partnerships. European engineers demanded to inspect the receivers, certain there must be hidden wiring. But it was all real, all wireless, all functioning. Suddenly, global powers realized they weren't witnessing a regional experiment. They were witnessing the birth of an entirely new class of energy infrastructure, one Africa pioneered faster and bolder than anyone expected. What truly shocked everyone was the cost curve. A traditional energy grid takes years to build, requires billions in materials, and needs constant maintenance. But Africa's wireless nodes could be installed in days. A village could be electrified in hours. An industrial zone could be connected in a single afternoon. Energy planners began rewriting their reports. Politicians started recalculating budgets. Countries that once dismissed Africa's innovation were now quietly requesting training, blueprints, and licensing terms. The power dynamics of the world were shifting, and fast. But something even more dramatic was coming. The breakthrough wasn't just about delivering energy. It was about storing it, routing it, and adapting it with a level of intelligence that old grids could never achieve. Using AI-driven distribution, the system rerouted power in real time, like a living organism. If one node was damaged during a storm, another instantly took over. If a farm needed more power for harvesting season, the network automatically increased the supply. If a village went quiet at night, unused energy was shuttled to factories still running machinery. There were no outages, no overloads, no brownouts. It was the most stable grid some energy experts had ever seen, and it didn't even have wires. What made this even more revolutionary was how it empowered communities. Local technicians could maintain nodes without needing foreign contractors or specialized equipment. Micro-entrepreneurs emerged, installing receivers in homes and businesses. Students began experimenting with wireless-powered robotics and electronics, things once impossible due to unreliable electricity. Then came the moment that sent shockwaves through the global energy sector. A prototype wireless-powered electric bus rolled out in Nairobi. No charging stations. No cables. It simply drove into a marked zone at the depot and began charging through the air. A single bus wasn't the concern. The concern was what it represented: a transport system divorced from fossil fuels and traditional grids. Energy giants watched nervously. Automotive manufacturers scrambled for a response. Fossil fuel exporters saw their future shrinking, because a continent once mocked for lacking infrastructure had discovered something profound. You don't need to catch up when you can leap ahead. And Africa had leaped so far ahead that even world powers could no longer ignore the shift. Reporters began asking a frightening question in press briefings. What happens when Africa exports wireless energy tech to the world? Suddenly, old energy empires felt vulnerable, because history showed one truth again and again. The nation that leads the energy revolution leads everything else. And right now, the leader wasn't the US, wasn't Europe, and wasn't China. It was Africa. The next phase of this revolution was about to begin, one that would shake global markets and challenge the world's largest corporations. And the moment Africa hinted at exporting its wireless power technology, global markets reacted instantly. Energy stocks trembled. Oil futures dipped. Analysts on live television tried to explain how a continent once dismissed as a consumer market had suddenly become the world's most important producer of energy innovation. But behind closed doors, something even more intense was happening. In Washington, a classified meeting convened. Former skeptics inside the U.S. energy sector now feared that if Africa's wireless network reached full continental scale, American grids, aging, expensive, and vulnerable, would seem primitive by comparison. Meanwhile, China wasn't waiting. They dispatched negotiators to multiple African nations, offering massive infrastructure deals in exchange for early access to the wireless grid's patents. They even proposed joint research hubs and manufacturing plants. Europe, slower but deeply unsettled, began pushing for energy innovation partnerships, a polite way of saying, "Please don't leave us behind." What none of them expected was Africa's answer. Instead of handing over control, African engineers and policymakers formed a united consortium, one that declared the wireless grid a protected strategic asset. Licensing? Maybe later. Partnerships? Sure, but on equal terms. Ownership? Never again. The days of the continent giving away its best innovations were over. And then, something extraordinary happened on the ground. The first cross-border wireless energy transmission was completed, a pulse of clean electricity traveling invisibly from Zambia to Malawi. The lights in two remote villages flicked on at the exact same second. Children cheered. Elders prayed. Technicians stared at their instruments, stunned by the precision. It was symbolic, yes, but it was also historic. Africa had just created the world's first transnational wireless energy corridor. And once that barrier was broken, the dominoes began to fall. Plans emerged for a wireless belt stretching from Kenya to Ethiopia, then a western network linking Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal, then proposals for a southern ring connecting South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. Each new node expanded the continent's energy cloud, making it stronger, more resilient, and more efficient. This was no longer just a technological achievement. It was becoming a geopolitical force, one that could rewrite trade routes, reshape industries, and shift global alliances. But the most shocking development wasn't from governments. It came from African innovators themselves. A group of young engineers unveiled a prototype home receiver the size of a laptop. Affordable, portable, and powerful enough to run an entire household. If scaled, millions of families could bypass the grid entirely, drawing energy straight from the air. Power companies lose control everywhere. And as this new era took shape, whispers began spreading across tech circles and private boardrooms. What happens when Africa becomes the world's first wire-free energy economy? The world wasn't just watching anymore. It was bracing. The next chapter of this revolution would pull in billion-dollar corporations, foreign intelligence agencies, and rival innovators determined to either copy the wireless system or crush it before it spreads. And as foreign corporations scrambled to understand Africa's sudden rise, another layer of tension quietly formed beneath the surface, one far more dangerous than public negotiations or televised debates. Intelligence agencies began to move. At first it was subtle. Unidentified drones spotted near transmission hubs. Strange cyberprobes targeting the AI routing software. Foreign research missions appearing unannounced near newly installed wireless nodes. Africa's consortium expected interest, but not espionage. Yet the more the wireless network grew, the more powerful it became, and the more certain global powers were that they needed to either access it or stop it before it grew unstoppable. In Johannesburg, engineers intercepted a code fragment inside a failed cyber attack. It wasn't amateur. It was military grade. A clear sign that someone was trying to map out the heart of the wireless grid. But by then, it was too late for anyone to slow it down. The network's expansion created something unexpected. energy independence on a scale Africa had never experienced. Factories ran at full capacity without fear of blackouts. Water purification systems powered entire communities around the clock. Hospitals maintained steady power during surgeries, something impossible in some regions just a decade earlier. This transformation was happening so fast that global think tanks began publishing emergency reports warning that Africa's rise would fundamentally shift the world's economic center of gravity. But the consortium didn't pause. They announced something even more ambitious. A project so bold that even supporters questioned its feasibility. A plan to create the world's first wireless-powered megacity. No power lines. No overhead cables. No reliance on fossil fuels. A city that breathes energy through the air. Foreign investors laughed at the idea, until the prototype zone lit up one district after another, each block humming with invisible power fields that fed homes, transit lines, data centers, and public infrastructure. But behind the scenes, a secret meeting was taking place. African engineers were in talks to integrate the wireless grid with their emerging electric vehicle network. If EVs could charge on the move, directly from the energy cloud, Africa could become the first continent with non-stop electric mobility. Cars that never plug in. Buses that never idle at charging stations. Logistics fleets that operate at a fraction of global fuel costs. This was the moment foreign automakers panicked. Leaked emails from one European manufacturer revealed a single chilling line. If Africa perfects continuous wireless charging, the global auto industry will never recover. But Africa wasn't slowing down. The next demonstration pushed the world into disbelief. A drone flying across the Kenyan countryside, drawing power straight from the wireless grid mid-flight, never losing altitude, never needing to land. Energy experts called it impossible. Aviation analysts called it industry-ending. Defense agencies called it a national security threat. Because if drones could fly indefinitely, so could anything else. And that's when the final alarm bells rang in capitals worldwide. Not because Africa had built a powerful system, but because they had built a system that no one else fully understood and no one else could control. The race was no longer about catching up. It was about survival. And as global powers scrambled to form alliances, copy the technology, or disrupt it, Africa was preparing its boldest move yet. A step that would push the wireless network far beyond the continent's borders, triggering the biggest energy shift in modern history. What the world didn't know was that Africa's next move had already been in development for years. A small think tank inside the consortium, comprised of young physicists, engineers, and policy strategists, had drafted a blueprint that would shatter the global energy hierarchy completely. It was called Project Horizon. At first, only a handful of African presidents and scientific advisors had even heard the name. But when pieces of the plan began to leak, foreign analysts dismissed it as too ambitious, too expensive, or too futuristic. Then they discovered the truth. Project Horizon wasn't just a theoretical expansion of the wireless grid. It was a plan to create a global wireless energy corridor, beginning with a massive transoceanic link. A link that would beam wireless power across the Indian Ocean. Suddenly, silence filled boardrooms. For the first time in generations, Africa wasn't simply catching up. It was preparing to export energy through the air. And the first country they approached for a pilot partnership wasn't a Western nation. It wasn't China either. It was India. The geopolitical shock was immediate. India, eager to reduce its dependence on fossil fuels and fragile power infrastructure, responded with enthusiasm. A joint declaration was drafted. Engineering teams began to exchange data. Satellite mapping of potential transmission routes quietly started. When the U.S. caught wind of the plan, it triggered an emergency response. This wasn't just innovation anymore. This was an alliance, a technological axis forming outside traditional power blocks, and powered by a continent the West had underestimated for decades. Meanwhile, African media outlets were buzzing. Public celebrations erupted across cities and villages. Students in universities demanded to study wireless energy engineering. Young inventors built miniature receivers for school competitions. Communities that once struggled with electricity now helped test some of the most advanced power technologies on Earth. But not everyone was celebrating. In Europe, fears escalated. A leaked internal memo from a major energy giant warned, if Africa controls wireless energy, the global north becomes the global customer. In other words, for the first time in history, the world might depend on Africa. And that was unacceptable to those who built their wealth on the opposite arrangement. Foreign lobbyists began pushing for energy security coalitions. Spy agencies intensified covert operations. Bills were drafted to restrict African tech imports for safety reasons. You could sense the panic inside the global establishment. But Africa didn't flinch. The consortium made its boldest announcement yet. An international demonstration of long-distance wireless energy beaming in front of global media, scientific bodies, and foreign delegations. A location was chosen. Equipment was prepared. The world counted down. But on the day of the demonstration, something unexpected happened. A series of unexplained electronic interference signals hit the system. Highly sophisticated, clearly intentional. The equipment began to destabilize. Measurements flickered. Receivers lost lock. It wasn't the glitch. It was sabotage. Yet the African engineers didn't panic. They had predicted this move. They switched to an encrypted backup protocol, something only a handful of people even knew existed. The audience watched in confusion as the transmitters went dark for a moment, then rebooted. A hum vibrated through the air. Sensors flickered back to life. And then, without warning, the receiving station 140 kilometers away illuminated like a sunrise. It worked. Even under attack, it worked. The cameras captured every second. The world watched it unfold in real time. What should have been a disaster became the greatest advertisement of strength the wireless grid ever produced. Africa had just proved something undeniable. You can interfere with the system. You can probe it. You can test it. You can even try to sabotage it. But you cannot stop it. And as the global audience erupted in shock, applause, and disbelief, one truth finally settled across the world. The age of wired power was ending. Within hours of the demonstration, a quiet panic rippled across the world's most powerful capitals. Emergency meetings convened behind closed doors. Energy ministers, military strategists, corporate lobbyists, and intelligence chiefs were brought in at midnight. The question circling every room was the same. How did Africa pull this off, and what do we do now? For the first time, the global establishment realized that Africa's wireless grid wasn't simply a regional breakthrough. It was a geopolitical earthquake. A classified NATO briefing leaked within 48 hours of the test. One sentence stood out. If Africa succeeds in scaling this technology globally, it will become the single largest energy hub on Earth. That line triggered a domino effect of reactions. Diplomats began rushing to secure meetings with the consortium. Corporations that once mocked the technology suddenly offered partnerships. News networks that had been silent for months now ran wall-to-wall coverage.
Charts.
Diagrams.
Fear. Excitement.
Speculation. But behind all of this noise, something far more intriguing was happening. African leaders, aware of the sudden global attention, didn't react with desperation or arrogance. They acted with strategy. They quietly activated the next phase of the plan: continental decentralization. Instead of concentrating the wireless power infrastructure in one nation, a structure vulnerable to pressure, sabotage, or foreign influence, they began distributing the core nodes across multiple African countries.
Kenya, Ghana,
Rwanda, South Africa, Botswana, Nigeria. Each would host a segment of the energy web. Each would control a piece of the puzzle. And no single foreign power could dominate the system without dealing with all of them. It was a masterstroke. Meanwhile, as global power scrambled for influence, something else was emerging. A new kind of unity within Africa itself. Young engineers formed cross-border teams. Startups collaborated instead of competing. Universities shared data openly. The wireless grid became more than a project. It became a symbol of shared destiny. But the real shock came when leaked satellite footage revealed something unexpected in the Sahara Desert. A massive circular structure, kilometers wide, was taking shape beneath layers of protective camouflage. No official statement explained what it was. Speculation erupted within hours. Was it a power amplifier? A wireless energy accelerator? A global transmitter? Or something even more ambitious? Foreign analysts tried to interpret the satellite imagery. Some claimed it looked like a next-generation energy reflector. Others believed it was a megastructure designed to channel atmospheric ionization. One think tank called it the most important construction project since the International Space Station. But the truth was far more astonishing. Because deep inside that hidden structure, African scientists were carrying out an experiment that could elevate the entire wireless grid to a level the world wasn't prepared for. Continental-scale resonant coupling. If successful, Africa wouldn't just transmit wireless energy. It would create a synchronized energy field across the continent. A living, breathing web of power that reacted, adapted, and stabilized itself in real time. No blackouts. No surges. No infrastructure failure. Just continuous, self-balancing energy. A global supergrid born in Africa. Yet even as progress continued, tensions rose. Intelligence intercepts confirmed that at least 3 foreign operators had been caught scouting near the Sahara megastructure. 2 drones were intercepted. A covert listening post was discovered near a fiber-optic trunk. Sabotage attempts were escalating. But the consortium anticipated this. They began upgrading security to unprecedented levels: AI surveillance, electromagnetic shielding, counter-interference arrays, and drone-proof perimeter nets. Still, the most surprising move came not from Africa, but from the world's largest fossil fuel exporter. A major Middle Eastern state quietly contacted the consortium with a proposal: a joint venture, a hybrid energy corridor, a long-term alliance. The world was stunned. Why would a petrostate, the guardian of traditional energy, support a technology that could make oil obsolete? Because they saw the future. They understood that in the coming century, energy dominance wouldn't belong to whoever drilled the deepest, but whoever transmitted the cleanest. Africa had forced the world to rethink the rules. But even with international pressure building, with alliances shifting and old powers scrambling to adjust, Africa was thinking far ahead. Towards something bigger than continental power, bigger than geopolitics, bigger than economics. They were preparing for the first off-Earth wireless power test. A beam directed not across land, but into the sky, toward low Earth orbit. And if they succeeded, it would redefine energy for the entire planet and rewrite humanity's relationship with outer space. As the final preparations for the orbital test began, the world watched with a mix of fear and fascination. A sleek, silver satellite, no larger than a compact car, positioned itself directly above the Sahara megastructure. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a surveillance device. It was the world's first wireless energy receiver in space. Africa's engineering team counted down. 3, 2, 1. A silent beam, thin, invisible, and impossibly stable, rose from the desert like a column of light that no human eye could see. The satellite's instruments lit up. Panels unfolded. Energy flowed. And for the first time in human history, electricity traveled from Earth to space wirelessly. The control room erupted in applause. Scientists embraced. Technicians cried openly. Leaders stood speechless as the data poured in. Efficiency, higher than predicted. Losses, minimal. Stability, near perfect. The test was a complete success. Within minutes, every major news network on the planet broke into their programming. Africa just transmitted power to space. Humanity's energy future has shifted overnight. The end of fossil fuels? New superpower emerges. But the most profound moment didn't come from governments or corporations. It came from the millions of Africans who gathered in streets, villages, cities, and town squares, watching the announcement on projectors, phones, radios, and public screens. For the first time, entire communities who had grown up in darkness, were witnessing a breakthrough built by their own engineers, powered by their own continent, driven by their own dream of independence. Children pointed at the sky with glowing faces. Parents cried, knowing that the days of unreliable power were fading. Elders whispered prayers of gratitude and disbelief. This wasn't just a scientific victory. It was a cultural sunrise. Days later, the consortium issued a statement to the world. Africa is not competing. Africa is contributing. Energy is a human right, and our technology will not divide the world, but unite it. That message shifted everything. Foreign powers reduced their pressure. Corporations backed away from sabotage. Global partnerships formed around shared development. For the first time in decades, the world began to see Africa not as a resource to exploit, but as a leader to collaborate with. And as the wireless grid expanded, something remarkable happened. Villages lit up. Hospitals powered up. Schools reopened with full digital access. Businesses flourished. Families thrived. Energy poverty, the invisible enemy that had held back generations, was fading into history. The continent that once struggled with power shortages had become the world's largest, smartest, and cleanest energy producer. And as the Sahara megastructure ran silently beneath the desert sands, feeding light across nations and into orbit, one truth became undeniable. Africa didn't just build a wireless grid. Africa rewrote the future of energy. And the rest of the world is now racing to catch up. The story isn't over. It never truly ends. Because the moment Africa sent power into space, a new chapter of human innovation began, one powered not by competition, but by possibility.